I grew up in a quiet town in southern Illinois. I won't share the name of the high school I went to, but it was one of those old brick buildings built in the 1950s, with long, dimly lit hallways and a basement no one liked to go into. By the time I was a junior in 2019, the school was under renovation and a lot of areas were off limits. They even brought in temporary classrooms outside. But my schedule didn't line up with them, so most of my classes stayed inside the main building. My homeroom was on the far end of the second floor, right above the old library. Half of the lights in that wing flickered, and the custodians never seemed to get to it. Still, I liked the isolation. It felt like I had a piece of the school to myself. On the first day back after winter break, a new girl joined our class. I'll call her M. We'd seen each other in the hallway but never talked. She was quiet, polite, and dressed neatly, but in a slightly old-fashioned way, like her clothes came from another decade. She was placed at the desk right behind mine. She didn't say much that first week, but every time I turned around, she'd be staring at me. Not angrily, just staring. I'd smile, and she'd quickly look down at her desk. By the third week, things started getting weird. One evening, I stayed after school for tutoring. When I was leaving, the halls were empty, echoing with every footstep. As I passed our homeroom, I noticed the door was cracked open. Inside, the lights were off, but I could hear someone whispering. I peeked in and saw M sitting at my desk, with her back to me, whispering something I couldn't make out. I figured maybe she was on the phone, but there was no phone in her hand. I didn't say anything. I just kept walking. The next morning, when I got to class, there was a note folded on my desk. It just said, in small block letters, "You shouldn't be here after dark." I looked back at M, but she was just sitting there, looking straight ahead. Over the next few weeks, I started feeling like I wasn't alone whenever I was in that wing after hours. The whispers returned. Sometimes, when I bent down to get something from my bag, I'd feel a breeze like someone had just walked past me. But no one was there. The janitor, Mr. Carlson, joked once that our floor was haunted. He said a student had died in that very room decades ago. I laughed it off at the time, but M's stares made it harder to forget. Then one day, during a fire drill, everyone filed out to the parking lot except M. I glanced back and saw her still at her desk, staring at the wall. A teacher had to go back in to pull her out. When she came out, she was pale and trembling. The worst night was in March. I had stayed late again to work on a project. The sun had set, and most of the school was dark. I went back up to our classroom to grab my charger. When I walked in, I froze. Someone was sitting at my desk again, facing the wall. The lights flickered once, then steadied. "M," I said, but she didn't answer. I took a step closer. Her head slowly turned, and I realized with a jolt that it wasn't her. The face was pale, almost grey, the eyes dark and sunken. It just stared at me. I blinked, and the chair was empty. I grabbed my charger and bolted. The next day, MM didn't come to class. She never came back. The office said she had transferred to another district overnight. No one knew why. Her desk stayed empty the rest of the year. A few weeks later, while helping the librarian sort old yearbooks for the renovation, I came across one from the early 80s. I stopped when I saw a familiar face. It was M, or someone who looked exactly like her. Same hair, same clothes, same smile. The caption under the photo said she had died during a fire drill in 1983. I closed the book, shoved it back on the shelf, and walked out without saying a word. I never stayed after dark again. My name is Emily. I'm 19 now and from the UK, But this happened when I was 15, during my last year of secondary school. I've never been someone who scares easily, but this incident changed the way I see schools, security, and even people. It's still the scariest day of my life. For some context, my school was one of those big new builds that tried to be modern and safe. We all had to wear lanyards with ID cards on them. You'd scan them to get through the main doors, into certain hallways, even to leave at the end of the day. Students often flipped their cards backwards so no one could see their name or picture, but the scanners still worked. The staff always reminded us, never let anyone in if you don't know them. Our building was divided into sections. One part was a special school for children with learning disabilities, one was a nursery, and the last third was the high school. It looked huge from the outside, but the high school part was small and usually quiet. Because of the lanyards, it felt safe, like no one could just wander in. I think that's why what happened shocked me so much. It was mid-October, and I'd been off sick most of the week. On Thursday, I finally went back. We had double science in the morning and geography all afternoon. Around 20 minutes after lunch, I'd finished a massive bottle of juice, and my bladder was screaming at me. We weren't supposed to leave class, but I asked my teacher if I could go. He looked annoyed, but could tell it was an emergency, so he waved me out. At that time of day, the hallways were completely empty. You didn't even see teachers walking around. I passed through the double doors into the cafeteria. It was deserted. The chairs were stacked up on tables, and the sound of my shoes echoed off the polished floor. From there, I went down a side corridor, used the bathroom, and then retraced my steps back through the cafeteria toward my classroom. That's when I saw him. A man was sitting at one of the tables. He was too old to be a student, maybe mid-30s. He wore dark trousers, a jumper, and a black lanyard. It wasn't unusual to see staff or parents in the building, so I didn't think much of it. I just kept walking. Then he said, "Hi." I jumped a little and let out an embarrassed laugh. He smiled and said, "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you." His voice was calm and friendly. I noticed the lanyard again. The ID part was flipped backward, like a lot of students did. I didn't think about how strange that was for an adult. "I need a hand with something," he said. "My car's out front. I've got some supplies to bring in for a class. Could you help me carry them?" Without hesitating, I said, "Sure." He stood and gestured toward the foyer. We walked in silence. Teachers usually make small talk on the way somewhere, but he didn't. He kept fiddling with his hands, first in his pockets, then out, then clasping them together. I'm painfully shy and awkward, so I didn't say anything either. Outside the main doors, there's a 50-meter stretch before you reach the car park. The car park itself is hidden by tall bushes. If you keep walking straight, instead of turning into the car park, you leave school property entirely. We walked toward the bushes. He said, "My car's the silver one at the end. My stuff's in the boot. Trunk, I guess you'd call it." "Just a few bags," I nodded, still not feeling nervous, just awkward. But as we got closer to the car park, I noticed something. In the back seat of the silver car, behind the tinted window, there were shapes. People. At least 2 men crouching low. I froze. My stomach dropped. He must have seen me notice, because the back door of the car swung open. Another man started to scramble out. The man beside me grabbed my arm hard. I'm 5'1" and underweight. He was tall, broad, easily twice my size, but adrenaline does crazy things. I yanked my arm with everything I had and twisted away. Somehow, it worked. I bolted. I could hear footsteps behind me, at least 2 sets, pounding against the pavement. Thank God they stopped after a few strides. I think the sight of the big glass doors and the possibility of someone seeing us scared them off. I ran into the foyer, through the cafe area attached to the library, and straight up to the staff at the counter. I was shaking so hard I could barely speak. The woman there took one look at me, came around the counter, and led me into a teacher's office. They called my parents and the police. Security camera footage from the car park showed everything. The man had gotten into the building because a student had dropped their lanyard outside. He'd flipped the ID backward so no one could see the name or photo. They arrested him and the 2 men in the car for attempted kidnapping. I didn't go back to school for 2 weeks. I'm still in therapy for it now. Looking back, the red flags were obvious. The flipped ID, the silence, the nervous hands. But at the time, all I saw was an adult with a lanyard asking for help. Schools drill into us to be respectful to teachers and staff. I never imagined something like that could happen in the middle of a normal school day. Even now, years later, I can still see the silver car, the shapes in the back seat, and the man's fingers tightening around my arm. That was the day I learned how thin the line between safe and unsafe can really be. This happened during my second year of university. For privacy, I won't share the name of the school, but it's a mid-sized university tucked into a small city in the Midwest. It's an older campus with some newer buildings mixed in, but a lot of it still has that 1960s institutional feel. Yellowed tiles, dim fluorescent lights, and stairwells that echo even when no one's there. By the spring semester of 2022, I was living off campus, about a 10-minute drive away. I was juggling classes, a part-time job, and an internship, so my schedule was a mess. I'm not someone who enjoys staying on campus late, but during finals week, I didn't have much choice. My apartment was noisy, and the library was packed, so I started going to one of the lesser-used academic halls to work at night. This particular building was the psychology building. It's 3 floors, kind of tucked away near the edge of campus. It's known for being old and weirdly cold, especially at night. But it stayed open 24/7 for graduate students. The main floor was mostly classrooms, but the second floor had a small study lounge and a computer lab that was usually empty after dark. That's where I'd set up camp with my laptop, textbooks, and coffee. On the night this happened, I had a huge research paper due for my behavioral stats class. It was already past 10 p.m. when I got to campus. The sidewalks were deserted, the streetlights casting these weird orange pools of light across the pavement. I swiped my ID at the psychology building entrance and stepped inside. Immediately, the air felt cooler, almost damp, like a basement. The building smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals, an oddly sharp scent that told me the custodians had already made their rounds. I headed up to the second floor, laptop bag over my shoulder, and took my usual seat in the far corner of the lab. The only sounds were the hum of the overhead lights and the soft whir of the computer tower under the desk. I started typing, trying to drown out how unsettlingly silent everything felt. I told myself I'd leave before 1 a.m. For the first hour, nothing was out of the ordinary. I even started to relax. But around 11:30, I heard something. It was faint at first, just a door shutting somewhere down the hall. Not the front door. This was deeper inside the building. I froze, listening. The doors in that hall are heavy, and when they close, they echo. I tried to brush it off. Maybe a grad student had left a lab late. Maybe the HVAC system caused a draft. But a few minutes later, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing down the hallway outside the lab. They weren't rushed or light. Whoever it was, they were walking like they wanted to be heard. I sat perfectly still in my chair, staring at my screen, hoping they'd just pass by. The steps got closer, then stopped right outside the lab door. My heart started pounding. The door had a narrow, wired glass window, and if I leaned back, I could probably see who it was. But I couldn't bring myself to look. After about 10 seconds, the door handle rattled. Not a casual jiggle, but a deliberate, slow rattle. Like whoever it was knew I was in there and wanted me to know they were trying to get in. The lab doors lock automatically after 10 p.m., so I knew they shouldn't be able to open it. Still, the way they kept rattling the handle made my stomach twist. After maybe 30 seconds, it stopped. The footsteps started again, moving slowly back down the hallway until they faded away. I sat there in silence, my hands hovering over the keyboard, debating whether to leave. My project was due in the morning, and a part of me tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was another student, maybe security, maybe even a janitor who forgot something. I went back to typing, though my hands were shaking. Not even 15 minutes later, I heard it again. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the hallway. It was above me. The ceiling in that lab had those thin white acoustic tiles, the kind you can push up to get into the crawl space above. You can sometimes hear pipes creak when the heat kicks on. But this wasn't pipes. This was the distinct sound of weight moving across the tiles, like someone crawling directly above me. I tilted my head back, staring at the ceiling. One of the tiles shifted, just slightly, as if someone was pressing down on it. Then came this long, slow creak, like weight shifting carefully. My whole body went cold. That was it. I couldn't stay. I yanked out my flash drive, shoved my notes into my backpack, and bolted for the door. The hallway outside felt like a different world. The lights were dimmer than usual, buzzing faintly, and every footstep I made echoed like a gunshot. I forced myself to walk fast, not run. I didn't want to look like prey. I reached the stairwell door, shoved it open, and started down the stairs. That's when I made the mistake of looking up. On the landing above me, just one floor up, stood a man. He wasn't a student. His clothes were baggy and torn, like he'd been living outside. His face was half hidden in shadow, but I could see his mouth hanging open in a wide, unnatural grin. He didn't move. He just stared down at me. My heart jumped into my throat. I bolted. I practically flew down the stairs, nearly tripping. I slammed through the first floor door and sprinted for the main entrance. My ID card barely registered in time to unlock it. The second I heard the click, I shoved the door open and ran out into the night without looking back. I didn't stop until I was inside my apartment with the door locked behind me, my back pressed against it as I tried to catch my breath. The next morning, I went back only because I had to turn in my project. In daylight, the psychology building felt normal again, almost harmless. But when I passed the computer lab, my stomach dropped. One of the ceiling tiles was missing, the one directly above the desk where I'd been working. Another tile near the corner was also slightly askew, the same one I'd seen shifting the night before. I don't know who that man was or how long he'd been up there. I don't know what he was planning or if he'd been watching me on other nights. But I do know one thing. I'm never staying in that building after dark again. Now, whenever I think about it, my hands still get cold. Because I can't stop wondering, if I hadn't looked up, would I have seen him climb down? Would I have been alone in that lab with him behind me before I even realized it? I bought a new laptop after that night, and from then on, I only did my work from the safety of my own apartment. If you enjoyed this creepy true story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. It really helps the channel grow. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below about what you would have done in this situation. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next story.